Hello students, and welcome to this video on calculating or commenting on a public interest score. In this instance, they have given you the amount of the public interest score. However, you need to now comment whether this will be or constitute an independent review or an audit. So we have gone through the slides last week where we spoke about the public interest score between 100 and 350, where it is either an independent review or an audit, and then if it's more than 350, or it is a public company, or it is a state-owned company, it must be audited. And then if it is less than 100, then it should probably be an independent review, depending on whether the shareholders are also the directors of this company. So let's look at this question and read together. It says, you are a member of the technical department at your audit firm. With the introduction of the Companies Act, the firm received inquiries from existing clients whether they need to be audited or independently reviewed. So again, a lot of questions around what is the difference between an audit and an independent review. A review will have much less testing than a complete audit. You have been asked by your manager to draw up a schedule in respect of the 3 inquiries. So the first inquiry is Sunshine PTY Ltd. It says that the company is unlisted. It has a public interest score of 189, and the financial statements are compiled by their financial manager, Ms. Jacqueline Lombard, who is a chartered accountant. None of the shareholders is a director of the company. Then we have Full Moon Pty Ltd. The company is unlisted. The company has a public interest score of 337, and the financial statements of the company is compiled by an independent accounting firm named Zulani Jacobs Professional Accountants. None of the shareholders of the company are also directors. Then Starstruck PTY Ltd is the last company there, and they say the company is an unlisted company. The company has a public interest score of 65, and the financial statements are compiled independently by an independent auditing firm named PDK Professional Accountants. All of the shareholders of the company are also directors of the company. So now we need to go and look at a number of issues within this question. I've set up an Excel spreadsheet so that we can go and look at the facts that are available. So in the required part, you need to discuss whether this is now an audit or an independent review. So there's a number of things that we need to look at. So let's just quickly draw an overview of what needs to be considered before we just decide, how we're going to answer the question. So the first thing we need to look at is the public interest score. And here it is possible, I just want to increase the sizing here, it is so small. Here it is possible to have intervals that are, so it is less than 100, so let's just make headings here. Less than 100, then we have between 100 to 350, and then we have 351 and more. Right, then we have the type of company. That's another issue that we need to look at. So we need to go and see, is this a PTY Ltd? Is this an incorporated? Is this a Ltd, or is it a state-owned company? Then we need to also look at the compilation of the financial statements. So here the options are internally or externally. So internally would typically mean that you have some department within your business, like an accountancy department, and they are responsible for compiling the financial statements. Or it can be externally compiled, where you have an external accounting firm that compile the financial statements. So they are basically a contractor to your business. Then the last thing we need to do or need to look at is the shareholders. Are they directors? All right, so it's either yes or no. All right, so these are the things that we need to now go and look at. And from this, of course, a number of scenarios can be born. So what they have given us in scenario number 1, which is Sunshine PTY Ltd, here we have a situation where they've given us that the public interest score. So firstly, we need to go and look at the type of company. So the type of company, and it seems to me this is an unlisted company and it is a PTY Limited, so it's a private company. So they do not need to be audited necessarily. Then we need to go and look at the public interest score. And the public interest score is given as 189. So this is between 100 and 350. Then we need to go and look at the compilation of financial statements. And here we can see that it is done internally by the financial manager. Then the last thing we will look at is shareholders. Are they directors to the company? And in this instance, the answer is no. What do we decide then? The two deciding factors will, of course, then be the public interest score and the internally compiled financial statements. Because the public interest score is between 100 and it's internally done, it's internally compiled, this will be an audit. So what is required here? An audit. Why? Mostly because it is internally compiled. Had it been externally compiled, this would be, or this will constitute an independent review. Right, let's look at the next one. The next one is called Full Moon PTY Ltd. And again, we are going to, I always like to use the same criteria. So I'm just going to copy my criteria again and apply it to this scenario. So the type of company, it is a private company. Again, if we start and it's a public company, you already know it needs to be audited. You don't even have to go and look at what is the public interest score, etc. You can just stop if it's a state-owned company or a public company. That's the only check that is done. Right, so next step, what is the public interest score? It is 337 points, and that is between 100 and 350. So again, you need to remember that how we calculate these public interest score points is you get 1 point for every shareholder, 1 point for every permanent employee, 1 point for every 1 million rand turnover, 1 point for every 1 million rand of creditors, short-term payments that need to be done. So that's how we get to this 337 and 189, etc. In this instance, they've already given it to you. Then who will compile the statements? Here they say it is done externally by a firm that is called Zulani Jacobs, professional accountants. Then the shareholders, are they also directors? No. In this instance, what will be required? Well, we have a public interest score between 337 of between 100 and 350, which is 337, but it is externally set up. So what is required here will be an independent review. The last one is quite interesting. It is called Starstruck PTY Ltd. And again, I am going to use my same criteria. If I look at this is a private company. What is the public interest score? It is 65, so this is less than 100. The compilation of the financial statements is external. So it's done externally by PDK. And then are the shareholders also directors? The answer is yes. So this is quite interesting because this is the first one where it actually makes a difference. Because the shareholders are now directors, we do not need an independent review or an audit. So none is required. You do not need an audit. You do not need an independent review. Why is that? It is because if we look at this question, it says it is less than 100 and it is externally compiled. So normally, if we can just go back to the slides, I just want to see the slides of last week, Companies Act. Where did I save that lecture? If we quickly look at the rules for the public interest score, it says you need an independent review if the public interest score is less than 100. So generally we would say because it's less than 100 in this scenario, it is an independent review. However, that is changed if the shareholders are the directors. You do not need an independent review or an audit. Had we stated here that the shareholders are not directors, then it would have been an independent review. Because the shareholders are all the shareholders are also directors, you don't require an independent review or an audit. So you need to make sure that you look out for that. So let's just create an alternative scenario, all right? If we had a scenario where the type of company was private and the public interest score was again, let's say 60, less than 100, and the compilation was done externally, and the directors and were not all shareholders, then this would be an independent review. Other questions that may come up with you, I'm going to call this alternative scenario 1. So this isn't necessarily in the required part. Let's say we have alternative scenario 2, and we have a situation where it is also a private company, and the public interest score is, let's say again 60, which is less than 100, and the compilation is done internally, and the shareholders are also directors. In this instance, we are going to require an independent review, because now we have a potential here, internal compilation, we have the potential to have some fraud take place. You would find in the original one, it was externally compiled. So therefore, no double checks were required because there was a lesser chance of fraud. So in this alternative scenario where it is internally generated, it should be independently reviewed as well. So that is just something else to pay attention to. Then I just want to check, there was something else that I thought about. I wanted to ask, or I wanted to propose, what would happen if we have a scenario, for example, where the interval is between 100 and 350, and the shareholders are also directors, or here you would find that in both instances it is no. So I just want to create that as alternative scenario as well. I'm just giving you all the scenarios that I can currently come up with. So alternative scenario 3 is what would happen if you have a private company and the public interest score is, let's say, 320. So that is between 100 and 350. And the compilation of the statements are externally done. And the shareholders are also directors. What would we have in this instance? It will still remain an independent review. Another alternative scenario could be exactly the same as this one. Let's call this scenario number 4. However, we have an instance where it is internally compiled. Then it would again change to an audit. So you would find that when we have a score that is between 100 and 350, the most important thing to check for is how it will be compiled. Is the financial statements compiled internally or externally? That would be the main decision. If it is less than 100, it is important to go and see if there is a conflict of interest between who compiles the financial statements and whether the shareholders are also directors. So here there was no conflict of interest and it was less than 100, so nothing was required. Again, in scenario 1, it was less than 100, but there was no conflict of interest because it's externally compiled and the shareholders are not directors. So here we would have an independent review, simply because the shareholders are not the directors, and the directors would have to provide the shareholders with some kind of assurance that the financial statements are reliable. Then in this one where the financial, in scenario 2, where the financials are internally compiled and the shareholders are also directors, we have a clear conflict of interest here, because now we are compiling the financial statements, and people who are involved with this might even be an executive director. So we need to have some kind of proof that that it has been independently reviewed. Then between the 100 and 350, as I've said, the most important thing to look at is whether it's internally generated or externally. Externally, it's an independent review. Internally done, it requires an audit. All right, so these are the possible scenarios that can be tested. I hope that you have found this portion of financial reporting quite interesting. And should you have a question like this is how you would go about answering it, referring to what type of company are we working with, what is the public interest score, how do we compile the financial statements, and are the shareholders also directors of the company. I will definitely then see you in our next video. Until then, keep well.